Thank you and welcome to the school committee meeting of Monday, March 9th, 2020. This is your reminder that this meeting is being electronically recorded. This time I'll turn it over to Superintendent Sawyer to introduce our spotlight event tonight.
Thank you, Chairman. We're very excited to bring our partnership with Mass Audubon and Oak Knoll to your attention this evening, and to kick us off, I will invite up our STEM coordinator, Ms. Tammy LaFleur.
Thank you. So, we have been working with Oak Knoll and specifically Mr. Hitchner for 5 years now. And if you have any students in the Attleboro Public Schools, you probably know him better as Mr. Chris. Everybody loves Mr. Chris. As you can tell, since he walked in, they've all been gathering towards him, and he's teaching them. Just 2 seconds ago, I heard him talking more about the frogs and the animals. So this year alone, Chris has made it through grant funding, but we've made it a goal of ours. He's been in every single first grade classroom 3 times for lessons. He's been in all the 5th grade classrooms for a junior conservation commission, so we'll hear from some of the 5th graders. And in the fall, he was instrumental in bringing area high schools together for a climate summit. So we're going to hear a little bit from the kids first on what their experiences have been like. So 1st graders, why don't you come on up? How about over here? How about over here? And they are not shy, so I know you're So, do you know Mr. Chris? What do you like about him?
He is
Seriously, it's how I roll, my friend. How I roll, Declan.
an animal protector, environment, habitat, and pretty good with animals.
Pretty good with animals. What do you got there in your hand, bud?
A toad skeleton.
A toad skeleton? So there was one day that I came, well, there was a couple of days that I came to your school, right? And what were some of the things that we talked about? Who wants to tell people what we talked about?
The frog cycle.
What's that?
Tadpole. Tadpole is eggs. Froglet. Frog. It missed the eggs.
Eggs. And those eggs are special, right? Because are they like bird eggs?
Yeah.
How are they different?
They're like jelly.
Yeah, they're like goo. Jelly goo. Because do they lay them in nests?
Yeah.
Where do they lay them?
Water.
In water. Do they like water? They do. What do you got there in your bucket? What do you got?
A salamander.
What are those? What
And I
color?
get them.
Do you remember what color they were?
Mhm.
What's special about them?
They have dots on them.
Yeah, what color? Do you remember?
Pretty much green
Yeah, like a little bit of green
and yellow.
and a little bit of yellow, which is special about your wildlife sanctuary, Oak Knoll. That's the mascot. Because if you go outside and look under logs, where do you find the salamanders?
Under them?
Yeah, you find them under the logs. And we get so excited when we find the salamanders, because when we find them, we're like, hooray, the salamanders, and they're going to eat all the mosquitoes, hopefully. I'm not a big fan of mosquitoes sometimes. And what do you got?
Tree frog.
It's a tree frog. How did you know it was a tree frog?
Because you told me.
But if you were to make an observation, like a scientist, and study and look at their body parts, they got some special body parts to help them climb trees. Do you remember what we talked about? What's some of their body parts that help them to climb trees and stick to the glass there?
Their feet.
Yeah, what's special about their feet?
They're not sticky on them.
No. Imagine if you had suction cup fingers and toes. Trees and everything like that.
You try it on the frogs.
Yeah, some frogs you'll find on the land when they turn into an adult, but some like to climb up into the trees.
No,
And
like-
right now, you can start hearing them outside.
So like
What?
if you're a frog, you can just climb up there and you can see the whole thing by yourself without anyone else seeing it.
That's so-
And you can put glue on it so that no one sees it.
Where I live, the habitat where I live with my wife at my home, we have a lot of moths, and we live in the wetlands, and we see these little frogs sitting on our glass, and they like to eat the moths, and it's really fun to watch.
I thought it had yellow and black spots on the inside. That's why.
Yeah, on the inside thigh, she was making an observation earlier that she saw that they have yellow and black spots on the inside. They have really cool skin color.
Why do they have that?
I don't know. Why do you think?
Are they poison?
They could be poison. If we ate them, would they give us a bellyache?
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe they're trying to warn you. Don't eat me. I have yellow that's telling you don't eat me because I'll give you a bellyache if you eat me. So sometimes maybe when a fox like eats them or something like that, they'll be gross. And they spit them out. Hey, do you remember that time we were in class and we were looking at pictures of different habitats?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What did we look at? Do you remember?
The desert.
The desert, which was special because
Ooh,
there's a
I
lot
know.
of water or no water?
I know one.
Not a lot of water. What was the other one?
The forest where there's tall trees.
Very tall trees. What about grasslands? Are there trees and grasslands?
Yeah. And then there was.
Are there trees and grasslands?
No, they're caves.
There's not a lot of
They're
trees. There's
like-
like
they're
little
like-
tiny bushes.
They're like bushes with like some goo on it. It feels like goo when you touch it.
Maybe it's
Poison.
frog eggs. Oh! What did you want to say, Declan?
Another one's like the river.
Oh, that's true. We talked about rivers.
Yeah, that was the one that I was in.
And what was the animal that built a special structure across the river? What was it?
Beaver.
Beaver, that's right. They're like architects. We can learn how to build.
They have long teeth on top of their jaws that are orange.
Yeah, they're orange.
Because they're going in there and the color is going on their teeth.
You know, I have a lot of fun coming in your school and studying with you guys. Thank you guys for sharing
I
today.
kind of have that.
You kind of Are you part Beaver?
Thank you. And these three represented today Studley, even though Chris has been to all of the first grade classes in Attleboro. So next up we have 4 fifth graders from Wamsutta to talk about the Junior Conservation Commission that started Mrs. Dawson 5 years ago at Wamsutta, right? So if the fifth graders would like to come in.
And just so you know, Ms. Dawson won Mass Audubon's Teacher of the Year for that, for initiating this whole project. All right, so who wants to go first with this group? You guys want to go first? We'll let you guys go first. All right, you guys go first, because you guys have a different project than they do. Did you want to show them your items over here? Here, I'm going to grab this stuff. Sorry. All right. Here, I'll put this over here. We're going to move around. I apologize.
No, good.
I'm gonna grab this. All right, who wants to go first? All right, Jax.
It'll be fun. So, the water in this bucket right here represents all of the salt water on Earth.
So imagine if we took all of the oceans and put it in that bucket. It's all there. Yeah, it wouldn't fit. You're right. We definitely have, and I like how you bring that point up. We definitely have to use our imagination. We definitely have to pretend that if all the ocean water was in this bucket, what does this represent? Which is different. You want to tell, Shane?
Isn't this like 5 gallons of it?
This is a 5-gallon bucket that we're pretending is all the salt water on planet Earth. So this is like a comparative analysis that they're doing. So what then, do you guys remember? This is where it gets tricky. What is all that? If this is all the salt water, what's that?
That represents all the fresh water.
All the fresh water. Comparatively, this is 5 gallons. This would be all the salt water on planet Earth. This is a cup and a half. 1 cup is this. Does anybody remember what that is?
All of the water that's frozen in glaciers.
Yep.
Ice.
So most of our fresh water on planet Earth is represented here, and it's frozen in icebergs and glaciers, the polar caps, and on top of mountains. All right, so then who remembers what was inside of here?
Some of the other fresh water?
Some of the other fresh water on planet Earth. That's right. So where do we find other fresh water? What's a place where we can find other fresh water?
Maybe in the wetlands.
Yeah, like in wetlands.
Yeah.
You know, well, you guys want? Do you remember a type of wetland?
Streams, rivers, lakes.
Excellent. Where else?
ponds.
But remember, there's water can be found in 3 states. Matter. Remember, what are the 3 states that matter?
Solid, liquid, and gas.
Solid, liquid, and gas. So we got the solid water, ice. We just talked about liquid water, rivers, streams, wetlands.
And then like clouds.
Ah, clouds, water,
Vapor.
Or vapor. Good job. All right, so why am I holding this? Who wants to demonstrate that?
So,
Jane, hold your hand.
so one drop. That's it. That's all of the water that is that we can drink. That's safe for us to drink.
So,
Just that.
that it? Out of all the comparative of all the water on planet Earth, that little drop represents what all living things have access to that's safe drinking water.
It's kind of sad.
Is it sad or is it just, I think it's kind of cool. Like, it's like, that's just like, it's so phenomenal that all these wonderful living things like you and me and like everybody here and you guys, we all share that and we all utilize it. But do we have a responsibility to protect it?
Hmm?
Yeah, because
When you think about it, like when you're just normally using water, you think, oh, there's plenty of it. We don't
Right.
need to worry about I mean, you still kind of have to.
are we lucky to be in Massachusetts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Massachusetts got a lot of fresh water on the ground, right? Yeah.
But,
But-
when you shrink it down to these small amounts, you can really tell.
Yeah.
It's really not that much.
It
Yeah.
not that much. Yeah. So,
Kind of scary.
how do we protect it?
You conserve water, you don't use too much of it.
I am a big fan of that word conserve. I love the word conserve. I conserve a lot of things. I like to conserve money.
Oh, good idea.
But I also like to conserve my water too. I like to save my money and I like to save my water. It's like if I had a bank of water, I would have a bank of water. Like it'd be kind of cool. But what else? What else can we do?
You don't throw the water away.
Yeah, you don't want to waste it, right?
Yeah.
If you got it, you want to protect it.
Yeah.
And where do we protect? What places do we find our fresh water?
We find our water. We sometimes find our water in the wetlands.
In the wetlands.
Mhm.
That's right. So that's why we got to protect those wetlands.
Yeah.
Right. So we have had a very short relationship together because we've had a couple of classes together. But coming up, what do we got coming up that we're going to be doing with your school?
We're gonna go outside.
Yeah.
Well, not tomorrow, but we're
Well,
gonna go outside.
Maybe we can call and get together and we can just go outside and do that. That'd be kind of cool.
And isn't there like a vernal pool there? I'm sorry.
We're going to try and see if it is a vernal
Oh
pool.
yeah, there is.
Yeah.
What are we going to look for in the water?
Animals or something.
Yeah, like little
Yeah.
animals that live in water. There's some different types
Maybe
of
some
animals that live in those
salamanders.
pools. Maybe some salamanders. If we find salamanders, those are obligate species. That'd be really cool to see if they have a vernal pool.
Hey,
So
that'd be
we'll
amazing.
work with the conservation agent, Nicholas Wiley, and the city developer, Mr. Arazian. We're going to work with them to see if we can get that vernal pool certified at your school.
Pretty soon.
So
Okay.
pretty cool. Thank you guys very much. And
All right.
give them a big round of applause. So these guys is setting up why we want to protect water. But my friends over here, what do you got to demonstrate?
We're demonstrating a water filter using natural resources.
Okay. So can you describe to people how you made your water filter?
So we used a plastic bottle to create the water filter, and we cut it in half. And on the neck of the bottle, we put a coffee filter, and then we layered cotton balls, beans, sand, rocks, and we put cotton balls back on the top, and all of the natural materials that, if they work together, they make a very good filtration device.
So can we demonstrate? All right, I'm going to have you hold this. So we were pretending that this top part here is a wetland, and this bottom part is the groundwater. That Massachusetts is so cool, we have fresh groundwater, which kind of makes it easy for us to get nice fresh water. So we're going to pretend that this is like the pond water, all dirty. Do we pour it fast or slowly? Slowly. Why?
So it doesn't overflow.
Doesn't overflow, right? We don't want to flood. We want it to go slowly, and then it's got to go through all those layers. So you got some pretty dirty water going into your filter, and if we built this right, should it come out clear? Do you want to walk around and show everybody what the groundwater looks like? So part of this program is to help kids understand where our drinking water comes from. Biological filtration, we don't get into chemical filtration. We do talk about it, about why chemical filtration. That's different. That's a biochemist that would work at a water treatment plant. We also have people who have jobs making filters. like on houses and house filters. So we talk about the jobs that go with the science behind this. So there's a lot of different things we can talk about with this experiment. But when we were at your school, when you guys did this in your classrooms, how did it turn out? Did everybody build their filters okay? Did you guys get clear water? They did. Let's give them a big round of applause.
Yeah.
Do you remember who this was? Do you remember Kung Fu Panda? Master Oogway. This is Master Oogway.
Oh,
So part of this, which is cool, not only when you guys, we get grants to do this programming, but we also get to then raise some money to support, this is a Blanding's turtle, which is an endangered species, and we actually work with the kids at the center to help raise this turtle, and we're gonna give it to U.S. Fish and Wildlife in June, and the scientist Jared Green's gonna put a radio tracking device on it and release it into the rivers. And this animal almost went extinct because, well, my grandma was part of it. In the 1920s, the jewelry industry, we dumped a lot of heavy metals in the water. We've been restoring that. And because the water is getting healthier now, this animal is coming back. And so we know that the water is healthy because this animal can survive. So we call it a bioindicator. So this is a whole part of the project that we've been talking about with the kids. So from the frogs telling us if the water's doing well, to the turtles doing well, the whole life cycle, how everything's adapted. But thank you guys for your support, for helping clean that water, giving Oogway a nice place to live, which is pretty cool. Let's give them one more big round of applause. Just keep them safe. You want to talk about the next group?
Yeah, so next we have some high school students. Come on up, guys. And they range from 9th grade to 12th grade. They were involved with a climate summit. That was the first one that we've been involved with Oak Knoll, last October. And that's actually, the work is continuing, right? Cam, you're going to talk a little bit about the Climate Cafe too?
Yeah, so we're looking to have a Climate Cafe scheduled for May 21st at Bliss Dairy in Attleboro. We're looking to start a conversation to hope lead to action to start the fight against climate change.
And so for my other three friends, what did you do back in the fall? Cameron, you were there in the fall too at Wheaton College. No, you weren't. Okay. But you're following up with my, so I have an AmeriCorps member at the sanctuary who's been working with Cameron to organize this at Bliss Dairy, and Bliss Dairy is going to give out free Sundays. Woohoo! So what better thing to do is sit around and have Sundays and just talk about what our concerns are in our community. Like when Wilmarth Road got washed out, what does that mean, right? Like how do we prepare for this stuff? How do we prepare for flooding? To make sure that we're on top of it and we're not ignoring it. But my other three friends got to go to Wheaton College, and that was a really cool experience. I'm going to let you guys talk about it, but really quick how that was organized. It was 3 wildlife sanctuaries, Oak Knoll, Moose Hill, and Stony Brook. So we had kids from Sharon High School, we had kids from Norfolk come, and then Attleboro High School. There was a lot of kids there. But you all sat around and talked to college students. So I'm going to let you talk about what you experienced. Go.
Yeah, I'll start. We talked a lot about the plastic pollution and how it's affecting our ocean. Like, for instance, there's something called the garbage vortex, or no, the plastic vortex, which is pretty much this giant 20 million square mile piece of island plastic trash, pretty much drifting with the tides and with the current of the Pacific Ocean. The reason why that's bad is any sea life that goes in that proximity of that is in very bad danger, because plastic can be very toxic if it's consumed. They're trying to make habitats out of it. It's spreading all over the place. As you guys may know, a lot of our ocean is very sorry, I can't speak right now. Undiscovered. And so basically a lot of this trash is falling in these unknown regions of our ocean that even if we could get down there and clean it out, the tide is constantly sweeping all over the place. A part of this reason why it is like this is because it's very expensive to sometimes properly dispose of this plastic and trash. And not everyone kind of recycles, and that can be a really big issue. And this could multiply this problem much more if we continue this.
So what's interesting about your group, right? Because at the summit, there were 6 different discussions happening with students from 3 different high schools plus the students at Wheaton College.
Yeah.
So you guys were all together in these conference rooms having these conversations. So that was one of 6 conversations that was going on that day. Then you rotated to these different places. Did you guys have a different experience, or
Yeah.
do you want to go next? Tell us about your experience.
A lot of what I talked about was plastic pollution and how it affects the marine biology and animals in the ocean. So not only are animals making habitats out of plastic and ingesting it, it can also affect a lot of the plant life in the ocean as well. A lot of these garbage patches block out sun, and a lot of the underwater sea life can't get what it needs to survive. As well as pollution in the ocean in general causes a lot of things like coral bleaching, and coral bleaching is when pH levels and water temperature change and the corals die because of it. They lose their color, and a lot of the Great Barrier Reef is now completely white and dead and not like it used to be, as well as a lot of just animals in the ocean in general are extremely affected, and some are even slowly dying out and going extinct because of the pollution in the ocean and how it's affecting how they live and survive.
It's interesting that you have that conversation, you talk with that, because when you guys were talking about that, it connected home to me, because my uncle is a fisherman out of Galilee in Rhode Island. He was a captain for 33 years at a fishing boat, and he lost his business because of the changes. And it's like, how do we adapt to those changes? Because Rhode Island, Massachusetts, the fishing industry is a big industry. It's a big industry. Like, you like all those restaurants in Boston with all that seafood, it's connected to it. So how do we think about this? How do we prepare for this? So it was really cool to observe you guys have those conversations that day. What conversation did you have?
I wanted to touch on like how the event was shaped, kind of.
Okay.
So, like you said, it was divided up into 6 groups, and we were each paired with a group from a topic that we picked, and then assigned with a certain amount of college students. And it was fully discussion-based, facilitated discussions, and we kind of just went off of each other's ideas, so it was super open, and it was great for like learning about other people's perspectives and what they think about the topic, and then comparing it back with your own opinions. And I found that really like motivational in a way, because I feel like our generation is being most impacted by climate change, and we're the ones that are going to have to implement the change and how to slow this down and eventually hopefully stop it. So after the summit and talking to all the different college students, people my age, the facilitators of the whole event, I felt very like inspired to go back to my community and talk about how we can advocate for this problem and what we can do to solve it, and becoming more sustainable in not only our school but our community as well.
Yeah, having those conservative values in the sense of how you conserve resources and how you conserve things is, I think, extremely important as far as not taking for granted what we have, right? To really value, especially plastic. Plastic takes a long time to make, right? From all the way from the dinosaurs, because plastic comes from oil. So we got to kind of reuse that stuff. And I think one of my favorite conversations I had with high school students was talking about the school, right? They're like, well, not everything's recycled. We got to go after the operations department. It's like, well, why don't you talk to them first? And this is the other thing I like, is how do we have civil conversations? And because I think what we realize is that we think we have the answers for everything, and we don't realize that other people are working on this stuff too. And the issue is bigger than what's happening with recycling at the school, what's recycling in Attleboro. It's a real problem, because right now, nobody's buying our recycled materials. So there's an opportunity for business to create businesses where you can take the plastic, the floating plastic out in the ocean, and you can be turning it into items and reusing it and recycling it and turning it into, because right now, China used to do that for us. And now that's not existent. That relationship doesn't exist anymore. So how do we do that in-house? How do we do that in the United States? How do we take our materials that we just throw away and turn it into new materials and create a business out of that? And not blaming people for the problem, working together with people, because everybody wants to solve this problem. And that's the other thing I loved about this conversation that you guys had with the college students, was how do we work together to come up with solutions as opposed to just sitting there and complaining, right? We need to, it's okay to complain and get the brain going and thinking. How do we then create solutions that work together and listen to each other? Go ahead, yeah.
Touching on Elena's topic, a lot of the discussion that was happening in the groups also helped inform other people of things they didn't know. one thing I found out was a lot of the plastic pollution in the ocean doesn't come from bags, straws, and water bottles like a lot of us think it does. A big majority of it is fishing nets, and finding ways we could make those big percentages more biodegradable and eco-friendly could help out a lot. And I didn't know this before the summit, and I just thought, well, if we found ways to make bags and straws and those things that we use daily more biodegradable, it would just help the problem immensely. But finding out this new information about the fishing nets and how that is a big majority of it changes my view on what I need to do to help out.
Yeah, it's actually connected with my uncle because he has a friend who has a business who's trying to start a business of biodegradable nets for fishing, which is it's an issue. It's a complicated issue we should talk about. But that's what I think is great about what Shane's working on with my AmeriCorps member, Allie. Cameron, sorry. Cameron and Allie are working on providing this opportunity in Attleboro at Bliss Dairy to have this conversation, to continue that conversation. But I really appreciate you and the support from your teachers, Ms. Botsford-Milne, where did she go? And her working with Mr. Hodges too, to make a lot of this happen. We'll continue the conversation, but thank you guys for sharing that information. So to wrap it up, is that okay?
Yep.
Just to wrap it up, for me, I've been doing this for 26 years. Started at Rogers Park Zoo. I worked at Jane Goodall Institute for 8 years out of Austin. Coming to Attleboro was really interesting to me because Oak Knoll was going to shut down. Mass Audubon wanted to sell it because it was falling apart. And then myself and Lauren Gordon, who was the director there, we wanted to build it up from scratch and redo it and really do outreach in the community. That's where my strength is working with the schools. But it takes partners to do that. And there's a lot of people to name. and I have just all the way from Mrs. Boyle to Mrs. Marcette to Ms. Gustafson to Ms. Dawson, Mr. Hodges, Ms. Botsford-Milne, Principal Connor at Wamsutta, Nicholas Wiley, the conservation agent, Gary Arasian, the PTOs, the PTAs, the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, who's she's everywhere. The MCC, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, who's funded a lot of this. The Bristol County Savings Bank, who's funded a lot of this. But Tammy's the one who's connecting it all together because we're teaching programs from toddlers to preschool, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4. Miss Young in grade 4 over at Hill Roberts has been doing for years now the Habitat Heroes program. We're at so many, and we go all the way up to the high school and into the colleges too. And then I go to the senior centers. I go to the COAs and work with those groups too. So connecting the community and having these conversations is important for me because I think, my grandma worked here in the jewelry industry, and hearing her stories when I was a kid of what she was talking about with the rivers, and then being able to be in this community to try to fix some of what my family did, right? Because I'm responsible too for a lot of the stuff that we did. How do we find that balance of utilizing our city, developing our city, because we want our city to develop? How do we develop in a way that we preserve the natural history and who we are as New Englanders? We are kids who should be playing in ponds and looking for frogs and salamanders. We are from Massachusetts. That's what we do. We're New Englanders. We want to preserve that heritage with our kids and then have them value those places. So as we develop the city, we could get people to come here and do business here and live here. And it's all these people working together to make that happen. So thank you all for your support. And Tammy, thank you for coordinating a lot of this. And for the people who have, the jet setters who are making this happen, thank you so much.
We're so lucky to have you. We're so lucky to have you. So, if you'd like to see more of this type of learning, tomorrow night is full steam ahead for the 4th year. So, and Oak Knoll will be there. Because Chris is also working with TerraCorps, right? So,
yes, TerraCorps, AmeriCorps. Allie will be there tomorrow night.
Yep. So, and grants are starting to get written now for next year. So we do a lot of planning on what grades and what standards and what angles we want to take. But now you know why your kids are talking about Mr. Chris at home. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we have to unpack.
Yes. It'll take me a second to get everything out of here. So sorry. I apologize. do have my animals. We'll bring them up to the floor. You got that billboard? You're the best. Thank you. Oh, thank you. You get the tree frog? These filters are going to take a minute to hit. You guys are that was cool.
All right, next we have our Around Attleboro update. William?
For this week, for our SAC shoutouts, first one goes to Miss Nicole Lane for being selected Teacher of the Year by the DAR. The second one goes to families that attended the kindergarten information nights. And the third one goes to the AHS cheer team for placing first at regionals. For the elementary schools this week, Studley will be having their movie night on March 13th at 6 p.m. For Thatcher, they will be having their PTO meetings on March 11th at 6:30 with guests Mr. Sawyer and Ms. Regan. Thatcher will also be having their PTO student fun run on March 16th. And lastly, Thatcher will be having their literacy night on March 19th from 6:30 to 7:45 p.m. To continue for elementary schools, Hyman Fine will be having their PTO meeting on March 12th at 6 p.m. Hyman Fine will also be having their Someone's Special Dance on March 20th at 6:30 p.m. And Hyman Fine will also be having their Family Forum on grade span configuration on March 26th at 6 p.m. For the middle schools, Wamseta will be having their Trivia Night on March 11th at 6 p.m. Wamseta will also be having their Spirit Week from March 23rd to the 27th. Quell will be having their student versus faculty basketball game on March 11th at 6:30. Quell will also be having their talent show on March 18th at 6:30. For Attleboro High School, our 2030 project Wellness Week will happen through Friday. Stress relief, activities, and awareness is what's going to be going on. Best Buddies prom on Friday, and our Try-2 exams are next week. For community engagement, Blues Team Night for the district is tomorrow at 6 p.m. at Attleboro High School. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Next we have our business agenda, and for that I'll turn it over to the superintendent for his report.
Thank you, Chairman Withers. I'd like to start tonight by discussing what is quickly becoming my favorite topic, the coronavirus. I was on a conference call that DESE organized on Friday. It included superintendents and some healthcare officials. Also, it was the commissioner speaking and representatives from the Department of Health, Massachusetts Department of Health. So it was certainly good to hear from the state. The situation that we're experiencing continues to unfold at a pretty significant pace. This is 2 weeks in a row that we left school on Friday with one set of conditions and returned on Monday to a different set of conditions, that things had, just over the weekend had significantly altered. So they admitted that it was a fluid situation and that they urged communities to be prepared for the unexpected and for things to unfold at an inconvenient pace. So they're certainly aware of what we're up against. I have to say, though, that there was nothing particularly enlightening about the presentation. There's no secret information that I can relay that is going to put our minds at ease or feel like there's something that if we just pay attention to that or just do that, things will somehow be better. They did tell us that we need to begin actively thinking about how things might play out and to prepare for the potential worst. Not that they were predicting the worst scenario as an inevitable outcome. They just wanted us to be aware that from their perspective, there's enough of a threat that things are going to get significantly worse before they get better, and that we need to not stubbornly hope that that's not the case and ignore that possibility. One of the things that they urged us to do is to relook at our schedule for administering the MCAS and to front load testing as much as possible, so that if there is the need to miss school, that as much of the testing has been completed before that happens. So we will be taking a look at our schedules to see if there's time to be gained. I mean, usually we space things out because it's more convenient for schools to not cram it all in all at once. But we'll try to balance that against what the state is suggesting to us and see if there's a way to accelerate that. I also wanted to let you all know that we have been working hard and closely with the city's health department to make sure that we're doing everything that we can be doing. And in one case, we have families returning from travel, individual travel for families from places internationally. And there's a strict set of protocols that the city is helping us to follow in those cases. So if families are returning from a place that is a high risk, those families are being quarantined, and students are not being allowed to return to school until a 14-day waiting period. And during that period, Jackie O'Brien, our city nurse, is checking in with that family, in case we have a family in this situation, daily to check their progress. They are not symptomatic, and they haven't been they haven't been found to be carrying the virus, but out of an abundance of caution, they are being kept out of school until we're confident that they can be that the students can be included. In other places, students are coming back from places that are not high threats, where there aren't active cases, and so they're being interviewed, and we're trying to determine, make sure that what their threat level is in terms of who they've come in contact, where they traveled, not just where they came, flew back from, but where they were while they were out overseas. So we're working pretty extensively to make sure that we do not knowingly introduce the virus into the school setting by any sort of act of unintentional negligence on our part, by not doing what we can do to try to prevent that. So that's been a lot of work. The state made it very clear that they intend to, it is their hope and intention to hold to the current regulations around school cancellations. So there are rules that have been in place for quite some time that we adhere to currently, and their hope is that nothing's going to happen that forces them to do anything any differently. So I should remind everybody that under the regulations, a significant date for us is April 1st. And that's because any days of school missed before April 1st must be made up, regardless of how many days that is. So if you remember, around 10 years ago, there were some serious ice storms that affected a large swath of the state, and several communities lost multiple weeks of school before that April 1st deadline, and they were all required to make up all that time. So time missed before April 1st is treated differently than time after April 1st. After April 1st, the requirement is simply to make up 5 days. So we are, by regulation, required to have a calendar of 185 school days. We do that. Every year somebody asks, why did you pick the last day of school 5 days more than it really is? Because it's a regulation that we have to. And that date is insignificant because now that we've set that date, any days missed after April 1st, you only have to make up to that 185th day. And then after that, regardless of how many more it is, you don't have to make those days up. And then the last thing is June 1st. After June 1st, we don't have to make up any days. So one of the messages I felt like I took away from that was that they have real concerns about cancellations becoming a part of what happens at the state. Certainly locally, it's already happening. You've seen in the paper that there are districts that are deciding to close for different reasons, either schools or the district as a whole. So that's already happening. They are concerned about whether or not there's going to get to a place where the governor has to take action and close either regions of the state or the state as a whole. And when the timing of that is going to really have an impact on what that means for us locally. I should also mention that the state is not allowing communities to come up with plans to have learning that counts towards school time at home during that time off. So the idea of online learning or blizzard bags, as they're called, there is a pilot program that a couple communities are involved in. Because they're in that pilot, they are allowed to do that, but the rest of us are not. That question was asked and very specifically said, no, you may not use that as a replacement for school days. So that is not an option available to us. The last thing, and this moves on to sort of a new topic entirely, is about travel. So they reiterated once again that it is the position of both the State Department and the governor that all school trips for overseas should be canceled. We have a follow-up meeting to the one that we had last week tomorrow night. That meeting is at Brennan at 6:30, and we will meet with those families again to confirm what we believe is the decision that we made last week, that we should cancel them. We still have to the 16th, so I've pushed back on the concept that the school department canceled those trips. It's our perspective that we met with families and together, we believe we should cancel them, but we haven't done anything to make that decision finalized. We're going to do that tomorrow night. It is the opinion of the administration that we should follow the guidance we've been given from both the state and federal level to cancel those trips. As for domestic trips, at this time there is no such guidance that we should cancel those trips. And so at this time, we are not planning to take any action, although we are going to be reaching out to the families involved in the 3 domestic trips that are planned for the spring. So those are in May and June. That's a trip to New York City, a trip to Washington, D.C. to perform in the Memorial Day parade, and a trip for Washington, D.C. With the 8th grade. So all those trips are currently still scheduled to happen, but we're going to meet with parents, because one of the things that happened with the international travel is that the cancellation policy for the company had you had to cancel within 45 days, and literally the guidance came out on the 45th day. So by the time we had the meeting with the families, we were past the 45th day. Now the company has since changed that deadline in light of what's happened, but trying to get ahead of it with domestic to let parents know, listen, check your agreement, know your dates. If you wish to cancel, and go through the policy as the company has said, that's something you might want to think about doing before waiting, because as much as there's no guidance now, the state made it very clear that none of us should be surprised if conditions change between now and then, in which case we will be asked to cancel those trips. So we're not going to take action unless there's a compelling reason to do so, which at this moment there isn't, but there's really good reason to believe that that could happen. And so we have to be prepared for that, and part of that preparation is reaching out to families now and letting them know the situation and helping them to make good decisions. Beyond that, we're going to continue to try to have school as usual, continue to do the things we do. I know in some communities there's a different outlook on this, but for here, there are no confirmed cases of the coronavirus in Attleboro currently. So I believe that we should just continue to live our lives. We have Blue Steam Ahead tomorrow night, as was promoted a couple times already. Maybe the third person to say that's tomorrow night, and I hope that there's a big turnout for it. We talked about whether or not we should go ahead and have that, and from our perspective, in a world where there are no confirmed cases, we should, because we are taking extra precautions, and we're beginning to engage in conversations about extra precautions we can take beyond those, as we try to stay vigilant and do our part to prevent the spread of the disease. But that will all change significantly, certainly when and if we have a confirmed case in Attleboro. That will require us to take further steps. And then the real thing that I think will force the more serious action of canceling school is if we have what they refer to as community spread. So there's a big difference between cases of the virus that can be traced back to where the person got it from. So if you went on the St. Ray's trip to Italy, right, the people who got the coronavirus in Rhode Island that way, they know how that person got the disease. In the case of the Bleaching conference, like all those people in Massachusetts that have it, they know where they got it. When you can trace back where the person got it from, then you know that the source is, and you can isolate the people who had contact and contain the virus in that way, right? While we operate under those conditions, we can continue to have school as long as we take the proper precautions and be pretty confident in our ability to keep people safe. When it changes is when they get to what they refer to as community spread, where you're not sure where you got it from, right? And that's how it is with the flu for us, right? So, usually you get the flu. I mean, we always, assume it was that person who was sneezing next to us, but the fact of the matter is that so many people have the flu during flu season, you don't really know where you got it from. If the coronavirus gets to that state, that's when there'll be pressure on us to really to consider canceling school, because of all the things in the city of Attleboro, there's no bigger petri dish than our schools. And if we have the virus present in the community and we're not sure where it is to be able to quarantine it, then we would be contributing to making it easier to transmit from family to family if we allow school to happen. So that's the sort of condition that in which I think cancellations would be more likely. But we're going to be working with the city to try to work that out, because we're still trying to make sure that we understand that it is our impression that the city, through the health department, can decide to close school. So we're also making sure we understand where the authority to close school lies, under what conditions, and just get ourselves prepared for what might be a pretty dramatic next couple weeks as we continue to see the news be an increase from day to day at this point. So that's the best news I have on that, and we're going to continue to keep you informed as new information becomes available.
Mr. Domenici, you have a question?
Yeah, just one, just to because it's come up a couple constituents and some, how things can kind of expand on the social interwebs. Could you expand a little bit about the steps that maybe Jason and his crew are taking in the schools to ensure, to the best that we can, that things are safe?
We have a program in place to keep the schools clean, and we have the flu that we're fighting every year anyways, and so the surface cleaning, there are areas that are identified as being particularly problematic in terms of spreading germs, doorknobs and things like that, and so those those areas are targeted and given extra cleaning, and we're consulting with health officials to make sure that the cleaners that we're using are actually effective against the virus. There's been discussions about that. I mean, so we're trying to make sure that we have the best information and can do our best to every night, take steps to ensure that the kids are coming back to a clean school. I don't know if Mr. Furtado, you want to add anything to that?
I would just add a couple of things. Our vendors district-wide, food service, transportation, and facilities. Sodexo is an international company, and they're facing this in a lot of fronts, so that they're really kind of on top of the problem. And for all of them, the approach is twofold. One is to exercise operational stuff, as the superintendent said, doorknobs, surfaces, cleaners that are effective, not just any cleaner. And then there's also been a big training component. So these companies have been bringing their employees in and explaining how life has now changed, and it has changed. So last Tuesday, Sodexo had a half-day review on process and procedures for keeping the facilities clean in the context of this virus. The same thing with Van Pool and their vehicles, and the same thing with Whitson's and their food preparation and service.
I appreciate that. I mean, people start to ask, and before anything gets out of control, it's just good and important to know that there are extra steps being taken and extra precautions.
And we're starting to try to think through other things that we can be doing. So I know one point of contact that some people are concerned about is shared keyboards. So we're working on taking steps to be able to do that, because the last thing I want is people squirting their hand sanitizer into the keyboard. We want to make sure that we provide an appropriate means for cleaning those, because that is a place where there's a high transmission area. But there are other things that we need to be thinking about, changes in behavior. Last night at my son's lacrosse game, that was the first time I saw the two teams didn't shake hands after the game. They elbow bumped. So I think a lot of people understand that under these conditions, some things need to change, and we're going to be working with principals to think through some of the things we need to do different to help minimize how much opportunity there is to spread a virus if it certainly gets into the school.
Mr. Goodes?
I had another question, but just to follow up on Mr. Furtado's comments. I think about a year ago, Jason Parento was showing the facility subcommittee the new cleaning methods they had, and some of the new cleaning solutions they were using, which were already more improved than what they had. Of course, we didn't have coronavirus tested against at the time, but they had already started to take some additional steps, and the way they were applying it was much more efficient, so they could clean more quickly in more spaces. But the question I had was kind of going back to the travel. You clarified nothing has been canceled, that you're still working with the families about that decision.
Yeah, I mean, we talked pretty frankly about the fact that we all think we should cancel, and the perception of the people in the room was that that's how parents felt as well. But in conversations since then, we keep getting the feedback that, well, you canceled the trip, and I from my perspective, one, it isn't canceled yet because we could still go. I don't think any of the things we should, but to my mind, it's when you cancel something, it's canceled, it's over, and I don't think that's a decision that we should be making without the input of families. So that's why we're having these meetings, because we want to all agree on what we're doing, rather than people feeling like something's being done to them. So that's partly why I've been pushing back on the notion that anything's canceled yet.
So is it a matter of you either go or cancel, or are there any other options for
Yeah, there are several options, and those options keep developing because as parents have been pretty clear and expecting from us, but we didn't really need to be prompted. We were well aware that we need to do this anyways. We're trying to advocate for our families to get the best possible outcome. Right. In this industry, because setting up these trips requires paying people to do the work. The idea of getting a full refund is, it's not a likely outcome, and families have been offered a voucher to have of equal value to take another trip at another time, but for some families that doesn't really work for them. So, how much of a refund we can get. When we first had the conversation, we'd already missed the point for them to get the, half of a refund back that would normally be the case. So we've already been successful in getting the company to change that policy, but we're continuing to try to figure out what's the best deal we can get for people, and doing what we can to help them, because it's a pretty significant investment to commit to one of those trips, and I understand people's frustration, but I also understand that our partners in EF and Acclorica, they're dealing with a pretty significant crisis on their hands, and I think they're doing the best that they can.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. I just wanted to update you. We had our first meeting with the PTO of Hill Roberts as part of our tour of the district for the reconfiguration. As I indicated in an update, I think 2 weeks ago, the elementary staff came back 70% not in favor of the proposal. So, I think some people said, well, why are we going on this tour if the faculty don't support the plan? What's the point of going out and having this conversation with parents? But from our perspective, while it's a significant development that we don't have enough buy-in for this to be something that is easy for us to support at this time under these conditions, the problems that we're trying to solve remain, and there's no clear way to fix them without considering some other things that might not be quite as palatable. So from our perspective, this is just part of an ongoing process, and there's no reason to not go out and meet with families and give them the update and answer their questions. Tell them the answers to the questions they asked the last time we went out. We actually have those answers, so we wanted to share that information with them and gauge their perception. I have to say, at Hill Roberts, there was a significant amount of support for the proposal in that meeting that we had. And I think in some other schools it won't be quite that way, but it's helpful to us to hear that full range of perspectives on the issue, and to be able to bring that back to you as part of the full picture that you have to weigh in the decision that we'll be asking you to make in April. We'll have 4 more, so we're at Thatcher this week on the 11th, we're at Studley next week on the 18th, and then the following week we finish up with Willett on the 25th and Hyman Fine on the 26th.
Hey, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So initially, after the first round, or around the time of the first round, when the teachers were polled, if I remember correctly, it was about a third for, a third against, a third to be determined. Any thoughts or feedback as to why that has skewed so far?
Well, so the first question, we were just asking them whether or not they were willing to consider the concept enough to warrant even getting in and figuring out the answers to some of their questions. Mm-hmm. So if they knew they didn't like the idea without even having answers to the questions, then there was no reason to waste everyone's time trying to figure those things out. So at that time, when there was no stakes, they said, okay, yeah, we're curious enough, please answer our questions. Mm-hmm. So we came back and we answered the questions, and the results indicate that the answers were not to enough people's liking. Okay. We'll get into the details when we do our presentation in April, but in our tour of the elementary schools with the staff, we had conversations with people, and there were some definite trends that we'll certainly be relaying back to you as to some of the issues. Why any one person voted one way or the other, they'd have to speak to, but on the whole, you kind of get a sense of what some of the concerns were based on the same things you hear in every building when you go and you talk to them.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to give you a quick update on our budget development for FY21. As I mentioned in one of my updates, I did meet Mr. Furtado when I met with the mayor, and he has pledged to honor his commitment from last year, so same level of funding that we have, I will say, enjoyed, and because it is more than is required of the city, and without those funds, we would be facing a crisis. So it was a relief to hear that he'll be honoring those commitments again. There was no reason to believe he wouldn't, but we certainly wanted to make sure that that's what we should be planning for. That figure, though, certainly leaves us well short of where we hoped to be based on the Student Opportunity Act, but doesn't leave us in a place where we're facing a crisis. So we continue to work on various things that we can do to maximize the dollars that are going to be available to us. I know that the city side is working on some things that they can do to help improve the budget picture for the city as a whole. And I also know that our delegation at the State House is working on trying to get a better share. Representative Hawkins is just tireless in his support on this issue. He did relay to me that, as I believe we've explained, the economically disadvantaged correction that was pledged to be made, 1/7 of that as a 7-year rollout should have been a 14% increase, but because they increased the number of because they changed how they count those students, that had a cost associated with it. So they said they couldn't do that and the 14%, so they only funded at 4%. And we've been asking, well, what was the difference there? According to the calculation that was provided to Representative Hawkins, that there was a difference of $286,000 for the city. So while again not quite as much as we imagined we'd be getting, that money in and of itself would be making a significant difference in terms of our ability to address some of our needs for next year. So whatever he and the rest of the delegation can do to help improve the picture will be much appreciated. So between their work, Mr. Furtado's work, the work going on behind the scenes at City Hall, we hope that when we present the budget at the end of the month, the picture will be better than we were looking at when the number first came out in January. No questions about that. I just wanted to give you a quick report on the use of Coelho as the Ward 1 polling location. That went well, without incident. The traffic was steady enough throughout the day that our belief that that would have been a problem to try to have school, I think, was validated by the experience there. Perhaps, well, no, I mean, with the number of cars that this, by virtue of having school there, the staff would have had, there would have been a real crunch at any point during the day, and then the busy parts of the polling day, especially the morning when we also have buses coming in, I just don't think it would have been feasible. So while, certainly, I have the joy of being on social media from time to time, and saw that not everyone was such a fan of not having school on Tuesday. That is the trade-off we had to make to accommodate the electorate in Ward 1. I will say that we, based on that experience, will be taking a very careful look at how things go in September for the primary, the state primary. So based on the numbers historically, there should be a much lower turnout for that day than we had on Super Tuesday. But one, there's no guarantee that that's the case. And two, this will be the first time where, well, not the first time, we did it that original time too, but this will be the first time since we've made this decision that we'll be doing these two things at the same time. And we'll certainly report back to you on how that goes. But based on how Super Tuesday went, we'll certainly be taking some steps to try to make that as doable as possible. Because that's really early in the school year, which is always a challenge. Because, as you well know, those first couple of weeks have their own set of challenges.
Mr. Curtis? Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has the Election Commission given any feedback as far as how they thought it went?
Anecdotally, while it was going on, there were the perspective was they were happy. Okay. I think there are some things that we can work out with them to make it even better. but I have not had any official communication from them.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bowles was there and trying to support them, and you know, he had some ideas about what they could do next time, but he did say that he thought it went well from their perspective.
Thank you.
That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Sawyer. Next, we have our minutes from our February 24th, 2020 meeting. The draft minutes were circulated with your materials. Have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Any discussion or edits? All in favor?
Aye.
So we have a consent agenda. Motion to accept the donation in the amount of $60 from Laura Cataloni to Attleboro High School.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept the donation in the amount of $171.44 from Bliss Brothers to the class of 2021.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept the donation in the amount of $2,460 to the boys and girls track teams from the Rebecca Lynn Whitefield Foundation.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept the donation of 4 copies of the resource book India Unveiled to the library at the high school and 3 middle schools from Mr. and Mrs. Gupta of Carlisle, Mass. $65 per book for a total of $260.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept anonymous cash donation in the amount of $140 for the 12 Plus programs trip to attend the PAW Sox on May 21st, 2020.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept the rebate check from the donation box for January in the amount of $7.50 from Bay State Textiles, Inc. inventory purchase to the Hill Roberts Gifts donation line.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept the donation in the amount of $750 from Rachel Santos to the Attleboro Public Schools District Gifts and Donation Line.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept the contractual obligation in the amount of $134.50 from Planet Aid, Inc. as broken down in my memorandum dated March 5th, 2020.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve an overnight international field trip proposal for 45 Attleboro High School students to travel to Italy and Sicily on April of 2023.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you for that act of optimism.
That concludes consent agenda. Next, we have subcommittee reports. Mr. Domenici?
Thank you. So, at our last meeting, first and foremost, I just want to thank my fellow committee members for nominating me to chair. I appreciate it, and I hope I do you proud. We had a couple things to discuss. With regards to the MSBA update, and I wasn't sure if you were going to have any, so I get to give the updates. As of, and we have our school building committee meeting coming up on Wednesday, but we still have about $30 to $40 million in work put out to bid on the last bid package. So by April, we should have a good sense of what the final number is going to be. We're very optimistic that we remain on budget. And it's really looking positive to not only to remaining on budget, but also potentially for some field work for Brennan to be able to work that into the project. So we remain optimistic, and hopefully everything comes back. The flip side of that is that there was some discussion at the weekly meeting. Mr. Furtado let us know about the potential impacts of the coronavirus could have on the building with any costs or supplies coming out of China. So it's the possibility that the project is looking to establish a contingency to address any of these potential costs. And then back to some good news, there was initially some concern about tariffs on steel being used in the project. So, it's prefabbed down from Canada, but it's we get the steel from Alabama. So we thought we had some good standing with respect to that. Also that we had an existing contract in place before any of the potential, this potential tariff could take place. Representative Kennedy confirmed that the steel we are using is tariff-free. So that is one concern that we no longer have to worry about with respect to the project. We also, sticking with some additional, moving away from MSBA, but to some other work, we have selected I guess at this point in time, because I was the ex officio member of the Municipal Building Commission for the Wamsutta and Brennan Middle School roof projects. We chose an owner's project manager, which is Skanska, and we now have our architect, which is Russo Bar. At the time we had met at the meeting, we were still waiting and having presentations, but those have now been finalized, so we're excited about that. And then also to report on the gym floors at Hill Roberts and Hyman Fine. Recently, the administration met with the municipal council about the removal and the replacement of the floors. They're going to be removed and replaced with wooden floors. The council has asked the mayor to resubmit the request because the first request didn't include the removal of the floors. There was discussion about maybe encapsulating the existing floors, but for a variety of reasons, it just is not the right way to go. The cost of the removal of the floors was discussed, as well as the cost to install new flooring. The wood flooring is less expensive than the rubber floors, and so the administration will meet with City Hall to discuss the funding sources. So the idea is that this project will still be done over the summer. So between the roof projects and the gym floor projects, we will have quite a busy summer. We also talked about future meeting locations. I guess for a while we had been meeting at different schools. We had, for different reasons, came back here, and our next meeting we will be meeting at the Coelho Middle School, and then we'll start talking about other potentials. Obviously, with Brennan, Wamsutta, Hill Roberts, and Hyman Fine work, we have some good options to see some work that's been done. We did ask, just kind of an open question that came up at our meeting was about, in fact, I asked it was about work at Thatcher with respect to the drive where parents are now being asked to come in. Mr. Furtado did say that is part of the road work that's being proposed, along with some work at Hill Roberts and Hyman Fine. So, we have an expectation that work will be done. There were a couple of other items that we were kind of discussing a bit, but we're not quite ready to bring those out of committee. So the hope is that at our next meeting, we will and be able to have that discussion with the full floor. And we had no motions to bring forward at this time, so that concludes my report.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Geddes.
Quick, just a follow-up on the MSBA report. So we had a school building committee meeting in February, mid-February, where we were told that, or I think it was at our last school committee meeting, it's part of your update for the MSBA, was we were at $90,000 approximately in change orders. From that Monday night meeting to our Wednesday night meeting, that number had actually gone down to approximately $70,000. So hopefully that number will go down again this Wednesday for the SBC meeting.
Mr. Hill?
Just a clarifying question on the gym floor issue. You used the word it wasn't the right way to go with the encapsulation. And so I just want a clarification on the what was wrong with the encapsulation.
I think there was concerns, and I'll ask Mr. Furtado for a little clarification about the potential, materials underneath and underlaying, whether or not it could be considered, hazardous if there would be more removal. And I think not only the encapsulation, just concerns about just covering it up, but I think it also had an impact on the height of the floor, too.
Yeah, I think there were two when we presented to council members. One had to do with the materials used in the existing floors and concerns with there possibly being unwanted material there. So they preferred that all of that material simply be taken out rather than encapsulated. And then secondly, that the gym would have to be reconfigured doorways, basketball hoops, things like that, because the floor would be raised by 5 millimeters. So not a lot, but it changes door thresholds and things like that. So their primary concern had to do with the existing floor.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Policy and Personnel Subcommittee met on March 2nd. We continued our review and updating of the policy binder, including the newsletter that came out from Massachusetts Association of school committees in January. All these motions came out unanimously, so they'll each be put up right for debate. So the first one is a motion to approve the policy CHCA, approval of handbooks to align with mass. For the most part, our policy was already aligned. It's just some minor wording changes, but we're looking to fully align. So that motion's on there. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next is policy CHCA-E1, Exhibit 1, handbook requirement. Again, we're looking to align with mask. Ours was very similar. Again, minor word changes. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next, policy IC/ICA, school year / school calendar. We are looking to align this policy with masks policy. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Policy ID school day, we're looking to align it with the mask policy. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Policy IE, organization of instruction. Again, we're looking to align with mask. The only difference is that in the fourth paragraph, we put wording in there to align with what our district does. So it would read the primary / elementary level includes schools with pre-K through grade 4. The second sentence would say the middle level consists of schools for grades 5 through 8. The secondary level consists of schools with grades 9, 10, 11, 12, and 12 plus. Okay, is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Great. Next is policy IGB, support services programs. We're looking to align with mask. The only difference is that in the second paragraph, we're not using the assistant superintendent, we're using the director of special education and support services. Shall be responsible for all services for students who are not eligible for special education assistance, and it explains. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay. Next is policy IHB, special instructional programs and accommodations. We're looking to align with mask policy. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next is policy IHBEA, English language learners. We're looking to align with the mask policy. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay. Next is policy IGA, curriculum development. Our policy matched masks, so it is just a note of the review date. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Policy JBB, educational equity. We're looking to adopt this and align it with the mask policy. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Policy JEB, entrance age. We do not fully align with masks, but the administration felt that we should maintain the wording that is in the policy as it speaks to what we do in our district. So is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next is policy JFABD, homeless students, enrollment rights and services. We're looking to align with the mask policy. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. All right. Policy JFABF, educational opportunities for children in foster care. Again, looking to align with the mask policy. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Policy Exhibit JICFA-E1, hazing. We're looking to align with the mask policy. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Policy JLD Guidance Program. Mass does not have this policy, so the administration recommends removing it. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Policy is removed. Same for policy JP, Student Gifts and Solicitations. Mass does not have the policy. Administration recommends removing it. Any further discussion?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Policy is removed. All right. Motion to align policy JRA, student records, with the mass policy. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Policy JRD, student photographs. We're looking to align with mask. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, next we looked at a new job description for student support specialist job. It was provided to all the members, so we have a motion to approve the proposed job description as presented. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Job description is approved. So next I'm going to ask Mr. Rooney to join us up here. We're going to have a discussion. So the next thing that we discussed at the meeting, Mr. Rooney attended with his team. Mr. Rooney, principal of the high school, attended with his team. Mark Houle, the athletic director, as well as Ms. Pereira, teacher. And we were talking about the idea of rebranding the high school. This is mainly focused at the high school, but of course, as we all understand, when we're talking about the high school, we're talking about the colors, we're talking about the A, we're talking about all the things that goes beyond just the high school. It represents not only the entire school district, but as well as the city in general. So, you know, in a lot of ways, this is a big discussion, this is a big deal. But it was a very positive discussion. Mr. Rooney has already been with the team in a very inclusive manner, out there talking to multiple stakeholders, including student leaders, performing arts, athletic captains, staff alumni, and alumni associations. So he has gone you know, above and beyond at this point to be very inclusive as he could. You know, in a lot of ways, this discussion was about the legacy of this building we're in right now, and as we move into the new building, that legacy, and maintaining that legacy, and how to do that. We talked about some things that all these groups, especially the students, felt we must maintain. For example, the rallies and the powder puff games, the dances. These are things that are traditions that everybody seems to love, that we should absolutely maintain. And at the same time, there's some other opportunities of new traditions that we could start. For example, a homecoming game sometime, and so don't get this confused with the Thanksgiving Day. This would be a new opportunity, say a mid-October time frame type game, a homecoming game. Possibly hallway decorations. There was even discussion about a senior patio at the new high school. And then we had a big discussion about what defines, again, the high school, the district, the community. We talked about, you know, the colors blue-white, the blue pride, the A. Obviously, you know, you're driving down the road, you see that A on a vehicle, you know what that represents. We talked about Blue Pride Way, and we talked about the letters PRID and personal responsibilities developed every day. Then we started getting into the discussion about what our mascot is right now, and the blue bombardier, as well as the eagle. And there was a little discussion about how there has been a lot of confusion or even uncertainty about where that connection is. The best that we could come up with was that the bombardier pilots would wear wings with a bomb in the middle, and those wings were very eagle-esque, I guess you could say, so it's quite possible that that is where the eagle came from, but I don't know if we 100% knew that. There may be people out in the community that do, and I think we'd be interested, but a lot of people don't seem to truly know where that eagle came from, but it has been around a long time. Obviously, we had discussion about how the Blue Bombardiers versus the Red Rocketeers, that's a tradition that's been going on. I think we talked about 99 years at this point. So.
99, right.
But you know, on the other side of things, we did talk about how with the opening of the new school, the new high school, this would be an opportunity. If we wanted to ever make a change, this would be the right time to make that change. What that change would be, we're not at that point. This is just pre-discussions at this point, and the motion that will be coming forward in a moment is just going to enable Mr. Rooney and his team to move forward in the process, to hold further discussions in a very inclusive manner. And when we're talking about that inclusive nature, we're talking students, we're talking alumni, we're talking staff, talking school committee, we're talking community. So we're talking in a very inclusive manner, and then ultimately, you know, either just, you know, coming up with recommendations on what the rebranding could be, whether it's a new mascot, same mascot, whatever that would end up being, and that would ultimately come back. As far as the details, that's not what this motion is tonight. The details can be worked out. Mr. Withers would obviously be involved with Mr. Rooney, as well as the administration. But for now, the motion that will be coming forward is just going to enable Mr. Rooney to take it to the next level and actually start having further discussions and possibly come back. We did talk about, you know, the pros and the cons. And again, the pro is, if time-wise, if we were ever going to do it, coinciding it with the opening of the new high school would make a lot of sense. For me, one of the concerns I raised was the loss of that tradition. I would hate to see us lose the blue bombardier versus the red rocketeer, just because we are one of the older high school rivalries in the area, in the nation. 99 years again, you know, that's a tradition. But as I mentioned that night, for me, the eagle had always been one of those question marks for me. You know, where did that come from? I never fully got it. There was some pictures. I know I was talking to some people over the last week since we had this meeting. For example, hockey players. I know there's a hockey logo where it actually had the eagle wearing the bombardier hat and the goggles. So they did try to make that connection. And who knows, in the end, those are the kind of things that team might come forward with. Or it might be other ideas. It might be new ideas. I definitely want Mr. Rooney to weigh in. I'm going to give him a moment, and any questions, please, you'll be able to direct those to Mr. Rooney before the motion goes up on the floor. But ultimately, we talked about what the mascot should do, and this was an important point. And you know, Mr. Rooney and his team felt it needs to identify, clarify, and unify. And I'd like you to please weigh in, Mr. Rooney.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate the subcommittee members that gave us their time last Monday night. You know, as Mr. Storrs mentioned, as the superintendent and I were heavily involved in a lot of discussions about, you know, what the new high school would look like, how we were going to represent certain colors, represent our school community. One of the things that became readily apparent, it was through the architects, the project manager. We had to answer several questions in terms of the connection between the eagle and what our, you know, true mascot is, the blue bombardiers. And so if you look at many of the renderings, and most of you are aware that we do have a project Facebook page out there that is linked to attleboroschools.com, but it's also linked to the school's Facebook page. Many of those renderings have representation of Blue Pride. They have representation of the school colors, blue and white, that we're very proud of, and they have representation of the school seal. As Mr. Storrs mentioned, when I was running those focus groups to try to have a connection between the current students, the current staff members, into a building that they would not necessarily matriculate in, we did ask them the things that, you know, that do resonate with and represent Attleboro High School. And as Mr. Storrs, you know, very clearly articulated, Blue Pride and the Varsity A are the two things that were the most prominent. And, you know, I think it's the fact that there is confusion. The Blue Bombardier nor the Eagle really identify us. And they certainly don't, the two that are disjointed, they don't clarify any of the meaning. And because of that, they certainly don't unify us. I mean, we're unified around Blue Pride, which is a mantra that has been around for, you know, many, many, many years. You know, I've been fortunate enough in the time that I've been here to just kind of, you know, polish it up a little bit and kind of put it a little bit more to the forefront. And that's really because we've had the absence of a true mascot that people feel that they can resonate with. And I am very sensitive to, you know, the rivalry with North Attleboro. And, you know, some people do look at it as the Red Rocketeers versus the Blue Bombardiers. There are a lot of us that look at it as just Attleboro versus North, blue versus red. You know, North's mascot, you know, the Rocketeers, that's something that's been a little bit more timeless from the standpoint of, you know, getting into the space age, and, you know, we still send rockets into space and things like that. You know, whereas, you know, I did have one alumni association member that mentioned that, you know, perhaps bombardiers and you know, weapons of destruction might be a little passé at this point. And so I'm just asking your permission to engage in a process by which we either look at, you know, clarifying what the Blue Bombardier is, what it looks like, or potentially come back with another recommendation that has a strong connection to our city.
Are there any discussions? Yes, please.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Storrs. Thank you, Mr. Rooney, for the time you put in getting some feedback and really listening to some of those key stakeholders. I joked at the subcommittee meeting as someone that wore the mascot for a couple of years. I was surprised to hear of this possibility, but I'm also very open to it and kind of excited to see what you and your team come up with, and what recommendations can be made. I agree that the timing of it is pretty good with the new building coming online. So good luck moving forward with it.
And I do want to weigh in. The timing of this wouldn't be actually until the new building is open. That would be ultimately the time when if we ultimately make the decision, we'd be looking to make this change. I don't want anybody to think that is what happened before that point. Any further questions for Mr. Rooney? I do want to just add that, you know, I have been over the last week having discussions with members of the community, with parents, with you know, people who are in the various athletic programs, and et cetera. And I got to admit, I was a little surprised. There are a lot of people that, at first, they were very concerned. Is the polite way to put it. I know when you start talking with them, you could kind of bring them down a little bit, which is what I did, because you know, a change of this nature changes hard, and a change of this nature, if ultimately that is where we go, there will definitely be community members who won't see the positives.
Rightfully so.
Right. So and so we got to be, you know, respectful of that. We got to be cognizant of that. Is my point. But you know, when I had those discussions and I was able to bring it down a little bit, you know, and said, well, you know, what about this or that, you know, kind of make it a little bit more pliable, they became a little bit more open. You know, I wouldn't say fully at this point. A lot of the case was, well, it depends on what they come up with. So, you know, I would say that for some people it might be a hard sell, is the point. But again, I'm going to reiterate it one more time. The motion that's coming forward tonight isn't the change. We're not approving the change. We're approving the ability to continue the discussions, allow Mr. Rooney and his team to continue the discussions, continue the process, to make it inclusive and ultimately come up with, whether it's one, multiple, maybe it's rebranding of the existing, whatever it ends up being. And again, as far as the specifics, because when you think about it, if we make this decision in the end, this is a big deal. And we want it to be a big deal. We wouldn't just want to approve it, you know, generally on a Monday night and it's out. We want it to be a big reveal. So we'd have to think about how we can do that, you know, in the open meeting way and what have you. So that's the kind of thing where Mr. Withers would get involved, administration would get involved, work with Mr. Rooney. Ultimately, you know, we're going to need a team to work on this. Again, inclusivity matters, school committee, community, students, you know, alumni, staff, etc. Any other discussions from Mr. Rooney? Yes.
I do. Once more, a statement, and some of it could just be my own education. I'm not, you know, I'm in favor of exploring, you know, because it's always good to have that discussion. I guess my question would be, what kind of timeline are you looking at? And part of it's because if there were to be a change, then there would need to be steps taken so that these changes would be ready in time for the end of the school year. it's August of 2022, but it's really not that far away. So, did you have any sort of timeline to
Can you
come
just
back?
clarify, you said end of the school year.
I meant I meant the end of the construction is really what I
Okay,
meant.
alright,
So
okay.
sorry, I'm a little tongue tied here. So well, we're not near the end of the school year yet, but we're in March of 2020.
Yeah.
August of 2022 is really not that far away when you look at a change like this. So I guess my question is, you know, would there be some sort of timeline or update before the end of this school year with where we
I mean,
are?
you know, if you grant the permission for me to move forward with a process, if nothing else, I would come back to you in May with what the process would look like, which, as Mr. Storrs has already articulated, you know, would be very public and would be very inclusive. You know, so I would envision a presentation here, very similar to what I had made to the policy subcommittee. When I say here, I'm talking about at the high school. I certainly could make it for this group as well if you wanted me to, but that might be better served towards the end after we've collected a lot of data and had some focus groups. But for instance, either in the Bray Auditorium or in the mini auditorium, have some sort of you know, family-based focus group. I'd like to sit with student council, be able to get their feedback, you know, on a larger scale, and then even, you know, potentially at, let's say, the Attleboro Public Library, if they could give me some of their space and you know, be able to put it on a little bit more neutral turf, if, you know, some graduates or community members wanted to come and visit. And one of the things that I did neglect to mention when I was talking about, you know, the Red Rocketeers versus the Blue Bombardiers, is that, you know, as we were designing the new school, you know, we have 4 different houses. We started looking at ways that we could differentiate those 4 different houses, and one of the things that we went back to was our roots in Attleboro of being the jewelry capital of the world. And so each of those 4 houses is represented by a different jewel tone, whether it's sapphire or emerald, and you know, it's not actually green and it's not actually red. But you know, perhaps we come out of this process with a mascot that you know, is tied to the roots of the city of Attleboro. So I would, like I said, I think it's maybe in a world where I'm also trying to hire a new assistant principal. I think that probably the most aggressive I could be in the timeline as far as the end of this school year would be to come and you know, present you with some data from some initial focus groups.
I appreciate that. And then the only other thing is just me thinking out loud is that there's probably, although, you know, there's turnover every year in terms of uniforms and other, you know, artifacts that have the branding on it, but something to consider with the wholesale change is that there could be some financial accountability or impact in that respect.
As a 3-sport athlete, most of I feel like our current uniforms have kind of phased out the bombardier. I guess, like, we've all gone to like the block A, I guess, for most of our uniforms, and I feel like going to whatever our new branding, whatever it would be, wouldn't be that big of a change, or not a big change, but like, at least for our uniforms and stuff like that, like, we go by the block A for almost everything as it is. We rarely use the old logo anymore. So to kind of answer your question about like the
No, and I appreciate that.
That I do want to add in, that is an important point, and it was discussed at the meeting, is that the administration over the last, say, year or so has gone out of their way to try to maybe limit the use of the eagle and kind of stick with the block A. And I also want to be very clear, this is not in any way talking about changing the colors, changing the A. Those are firm.
Okay.
If anything, it was iterated how that's, you know, at the top of the importance.
The turf in that stadium is not going to change, so it might have to be replaced at some point. But, you know, we back in 2013, we had to make a decision as to what was going to identify us, you know, in that stadium, which, again, you know, that stadium is more than just athletics. It's Special Olympics, it's, you know, it's marching band, it's our health and fitness curriculum. And so, you know, everybody that comes into that stadium, you know, we had to make a decision. Do we want to go with an eagle, or did we want to go with something that, you know, we felt was more uniform and more consistent? So we went with the varsity A. And we moved away from the eagle on uniforms, really from a practical standpoint, because the current eagle that we have, like on sweatshirts and things like that, has such fine lines, such fine detail to it, that when you wash those uniforms over and over and over again, or when your parents wash that uniform over and over and over again, it loses that detail, and then it becomes kind of a blur, and then what does it stand for anyway? So.
I appreciate that, and I know that a lot of the uniforms are probably not nearly as effective, but being a pragmatist to some degree, it's just the things I think about, and things that people may come up and ask, like, well, what's this going to cost if we make this change? So, just things to consider. But I'm in favor of exploring it.
Kind of like another thing from the student body, I guess you could say, was we also, like, yes, we like the Bombardier or stuff like that, but we want, like, to be able to, like, go by something like the Bombardiers. Like, yeah, we go by that, but, like, all we have is, like, the mascot, and, like, if we were to change to something else, like, that we could go by, like, I don't know, I just feel like that would, we can go by or represent ourselves as, instead of, like, the Bombardiers, because a lot of us, like, as dumb as this might sound, like, some students don't even know how to spell Bombardier correctly on social media posts and stuff like that, and it just makes us look bad. So I think going by something more, I don't know, simple, I guess, could be beneficial for us.
Any other discussions for Mr. Rooney? Okay, thank you, Mr. Rooney. So I'm going to put the motion out there, and I'll do a roll call vote on it, since this is, you know, an important thing. So the motion is to authorize Principal Rooney and his team to research possible branding options for the Attleboro High School in accordance with the discussion that we just had. So this has come forward from the full committee. It was unanimously voted up. So is there any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Please?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so the motion is unanimously passed, we're asking you to go forward with your process, and then, you know, between the chair of the committee, the administration, yourself, will figure it out as far as the details. Okay,
We'll come back with something you're proud of.
wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Rooney.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One last item was on our meeting agenda, and that was a review of the 2020 to 2021 district calendar. Really, the main thing that needs to be approved was the AHS graduation date for that school year, which would be June 4th. So the motion that's on the floor is proposed June 4th, 2021 graduation date for the Attleboro High School as presented in the calendar. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next meeting is scheduled for April 6th in this room. Are there any further questions? Mr. Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Storrs. Finance and Budget, Mr. Larson.
Finance and Budget Subcommittee met on March 4th. Mr. Furtado took us through the monthly budget reports. We still have two areas of concern, that being transportation and health insurance. We'll continue to keep the committee updated as we start to get closer and closer to the end of the year as to where we are going to be there. We had a brief update on the FY21 budget. Superintendent Sawyer made his comments very similar. We also had an MSBA update at the meeting, very similar to what Mr. Domenici has already told us. We had a presentation from Abacus, which will drive one of the motions that we're bringing forward. We continued our ongoing conversation about transportation in the district, and we had a discussion about the student activity audit that took place. There were no findings or actions that need to be taken at this time based on that audit. So there were four motions to be brought forward to the full committee. The first, entertain a motion to approve the increase in pricing for non-Abacus students. It was sent out in your packet. I'm sorry? That are returned to their schools. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Just based on what the chart says, every school starts at $22 for any student that is returned from their bus because someone wasn't at their bus stop to pick them up, correct?
Yes.
And then it goes up and then it goes up $15 every 30 minutes beyond that, correct?
Yes.
Regardless of school. Awesome. Thank you.
Just to bring everybody up to speed, what happens is if for some reason a student gets brought back to school by the bus because they were not dropped off, the district brings those children to the Abacus program. They may not be part of the Abacus program, so there is a cost associated to all of a sudden having this child in the Abacus program, and basically that's what's driving this motion. Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Second one, motion to send, motion to approve the increase of the registration fee at the Attleboro High School Children's Center from $25 to $50.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Was there any
Yes,
particular,
Mr.
was there any particular reason for the increase?
Believe it is, we talked about.
Chapter 74 program, and what they're finding are people are registering and not showing up and taking spots and not showing up. So this is just to make the process more certain for the folks who are getting involved.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next, it is time for us to renew our copier lease. So we'd like to move forward with a 3-year lease with Konica Minolta for 2 machines. In the copy center, thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And finally, one other piece of housekeeping. We need to pay some prior year invoices, so we have a motion to send to City Hall to pay some prior year invoices, and I believe the information was sent out in your packet.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Mr. Chairman, that's the extent of our report.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Next, we have open forum. Is there anyone who would like to address the committee at open forum? All right, seeing no one, I'll close open forum. Does anyone have any other new business? All right, then seeing none, the school committee is going to, Attleboro School Committee will convene an executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Sections 21A, 2, and 3, to discuss strategy with respect to negotiations with union personnel and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee. The school committee will not return to open session. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Sawyer?
Yes.